The Palestinian president has now officially submitted his request to the United Nations Security Council for state membership. But that request won't be voted on for a number of weeks. And when it does come up for a vote, the U.S. has promised to veto it. So what's next for the Palestinians, and what will it mean for Israel? I came here to Tel Aviv University to talk to Dr. Itamar Rabinovich about all that. He's the former ambassador to the U.S. under Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. And I began by asking him what events at the UN actually mean for the peace process.
Well, what happened at the UN is indicative of the bad state of what we call the peace process. If you watched Mahmoud Abbas and Benjamin Netanyahu, you watched not two individuals or not two leaders who are taking their peoples in a peace process, but two, I wouldn't say enemies, but certainly rivals, to some extent enemies. Mahmoud Abbas used some incendiary rhetoric, and Netanyahu did not actually speak to him, or not even to the delegates in the assembly hall, but to constituencies internationally and in Israel. And clearly, what we saw on Friday night was the sorry state of Israeli-Palestinian relations.
Does it speak to the increasing isolation of Israel in the international community?
I mean, first of all, to look at what was going on in the hall. The way Abbas was received and the way Netanyahu was received, and actually Netanyahu began by assailing the UN and expressing the sentiment that Israel could not hope to obtain much support and sympathy in that place. But also the Palestinian decision to take their case to the UN reflected the realization that Israel's position is not wonderful, that Israel is losing legitimacy and support, that they are enjoying, certainly in a body composed largely of countries from the third world, Muslim and Arab countries, Latin American countries, African and Asian countries. They have what we call the automatic majority. They need 130 votes out of almost 200 members. They are likely to get that, they know that. And that's why one of the reasons why they took their case to the United Nations.
Do you think this was a big political win for the Palestinians and a problem for Israel?
No, I wouldn't call it a big political win because it has yet to happen. What Abu Mazen did on Friday night was he staged, I would say, a symbolic and a resonant act, and he gave, from his constituents' point of view, a fiery speech. It did well for him. We have to remember that he also needs to deal with critics, with the shockwaves of the Arab Spring. He needed to do something dramatic, not just drift along. But if the immediate consequence of all of this was the statement by the quartet setting terms for renewed negotiation within a month, he was very unhappy with that.
Do you think there isn't a chance that the UN Security Council will take a vote on that request
Well,
first?
we're not certain yet, but what happens at the Security Council, as distinct from the General Assembly, is that the United States can always cast a veto. It does not want to do that. It does not want to pay the diplomatic price of having done that, and it would rather marshal a blocking vote in the Security Council, which it may very well be able to do. In that event, the Palestinians will take their case to the General Assembly, unless there is a negotiation, and ask for recognition, not for admission to the United Nations, which needs to go through the Security Council, but for recognition of their statehood, which would create a different legal reality and, to some extent, a different diplomatic reality.
You talk about a different legal reality if the Palestinians get to the General Assembly. What are some of those legal consequences?
to begin with, Israel is now in, let's say, in occupation of large parts of the West Bank, and it lays a siege to Gaza. Call it legal position of the West Bank and Gaza is not clear. The issue of sovereignty is an open issue. If the General Assembly of the United Nations votes to recognize, say, a Palestinian state in the boundaries of June 1967, it would enjoy sovereignty, maybe contested, but sovereignty. It would then be in a position, let's say, to go to in the International Court of Justice or other agencies and complain about the Israeli invasion of or occupation of a sovereign country. It would put Israel in an awkward position.
Now, if the General Assembly just bumps up the Palestinian delegation to a non-member observer, what kind of consequence would that be?
Much more limited. Much more limited, and this would not be something the Palestinians would be happy with. But the point is, the important thing is not so much the events at the UN itself. This is an important arena, but we need to look at what happens in the UN as reflective of larger trends. Increasing Israeli isolation, increasing support for the Palestinian case in this conflict, and also a sense that in the absence of progress on the Israeli-Palestinian front, events in the region like what we call the Arab Spring, the casting about of Turkish influence and power, the always ominous role of Iran, are going to be exacerbated by this lack of progress. And when Israel calculates its national security equation, it needs to take that into account.
When you are obviously a veteran of peace process and these kinds of negotiations, when you look at what's happened in the last few years, are the Israelis and the Palestinians equally to blame here?
Well, we can even add a third partner, the
United States.
The United States. I think that between 2009, the Obama's election, Netanyahu's election, there's been no progress, and the two parties and the say the sponsor, the United States, all committed significant errors. There can always be a new beginning. People can take stock of their position. Abu Mazen also needs to explain to us and to the world why he did not accept what Ehud Olmert laid on the table in December 2008. He says this should be the starting point of a new negotiation, but he never said that he would accept that. So everybody shares the blame.
Why do you think the Palestinians haven't explained why they didn't take that deal?
Because they don't have a good explanation. You know, there's a first of all, they always want more. Second, it's also difficult for someone like Abu Mazen to sign on a dotted line, end of conflict, end of claims.
Why?
Because, you know, he himself represents the 1948 generation. This is a significant part of his constituency. This is a very important part of his own persona. And to be the leader who said, I just took part and I gave up, not just in deed, but also in statement, in symbol, in theory, I gave up the claim for the rest. It's not easy. We, the Israelis, were very lucky in the late 40s, in 1948, to have had a leader like David Ben-Gurion who understood that obtaining statehood and sovereignty for the Jewish people was the key issue, and he was willing to make huge concessions in order to obtain that. That's why we have a state. The Palestinians, throughout their history, did not have a David Ben-Gurion.
Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Itamar Rabinovich, on JN1. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.